The nurse walked out of that delivery room, carrying a covered bundle, and nobody stopped her. Not the security guard standing 6 feet away. Not the attending physician who had just declared the infant stillborn. Not the administrator hovering near the door with a clipboard and a face full of practiced sympathy. Nobody stopped her, except the woman lying in the hospital bed, half-conscious, heavily medicated, her body still shaking from 31 hours of labor, who watched that nurse move toward the service exit and saw something that nobody else in that room was supposed to see. A tiny hand, fingers curling, alive. Imani Roquan grabbed her husband's sleeve with everything she had left. Our baby isn't dead. And the man standing beside her, a man who had survived 3 assassination attempts, who had built a criminal empire across 2 continents, through sheer ruthlessness and a cold refusal to trust anyone, completely went absolutely still. Because, behind him, his most trusted lieutenant was already reaching for his phone. Before we go any further, stories like this one keep you up at night. If you find yourself holding your breath, waiting to see what happens next, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Every week we bring you stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about loyalty, love, and the lengths a person will go to protect what matters most. Drop a comment below and tell us what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it hits you somewhere deep, leave a like. It lets us know you're out there. Now, let's go back to the beginning. The storm came in fast that Tuesday in March. By 8 in the evening, Manhattan was drowning. Rain hammered the windows of Astor Crown Medical Center in thick driving sheets, and the streets below were already flooding at the crosswalks. Inside the private maternity wing on the 7th floor, the fluorescent lights hummed their usual indifferent hum. Nerves moved with their usual careful efficiency, and the world outside the hospital windows might as well not have existed. Kwon Ji-tae had been in that hallway for 9 hours. He wasn't a man built for waiting. He ran 3 legitimate shipping companies, and beneath that respectable surface, a criminal network that moved contraband through 6 port cities on the East Coast. He made decisions every day that affected hundreds of people, most of whom had no idea he existed. He had ordered men held accountable for failures that cost him money. He had walked away from rooms where terrible things were happening without looking back. But right now he couldn't do a single thing, and it was destroying him. He stood near the window at the end of the corridor, arms crossed, jaw set, watching the rain hit the glass. His security chief, Han Do-yun, stood a few feet away, stocky, quiet, the kind of man whose stillness communicates competence rather than passivity. 2 other members of Ji-tae's security detail were positioned near the elevator bank, dressed plainly enough to pass for anxious relatives, which wasn't far from what they actually were. And then there was Seo Min-guk. Min-guk had been with Ji-tae for 15 years. They had come up together from almost nothing, back when Ji-tae's operation was a scrappy, dangerous thing held together by nerve and reputation rather than money. Min-guk had stitched Ji-tae's arm closed in the back of a car after an ambush in 2013. He had been the one to talk Ji-tae down from a decision that would have brought federal attention crashing onto the organization 3 years before it could withstand that kind of pressure. Ji-tae trusted him the way he trusted his own instincts, not blindly, but deeply, and based on a decade and a half of evidence. Min-guk stood near the vending machines, coffee in hand, his expression carrying that particular blend of worry and readiness that Ji-tae had seen on him 100 times before. Faithful, present. Exactly what you'd expect from a man who had shown up for you every time it counted. Ji-tae would think about that expression later. He would replay it until he understood every layer underneath it. But that was later. Right now he was just a man waiting to find out if his wife and child were going to be okay. Imani was 31 weeks when her water broke at 3 in the morning. She had been awake anyway. She hadn't been sleeping well for the last month, which her obstetrician said was normal, and which Ji-tae took as a personal failing on his part that he couldn't fix through money or intimidation. He'd had the bedroom adjusted twice, new mattress, different temperature controls, blackout curtains. None of it touched the insomnia that came with carrying a pregnancy that had started as the most unexpected thing in both their lives. Their marriage had not been the product of a love story in any conventional sense. Imani had been managing a restaurant in Midtown when she got caught in the crossfire of something. She had nothing to do with a dispute between Ji-tae's organization and a rival group that had decided to make a point in a public place. Ji-tae had been there. He had moved her out of the situation quickly and without ceremony, the way he handled most problems. And he had fully intended to simply ensure she was safe and then go back to his evening. Instead, he had made the mistake of actually talking to her. Imani Ro-kwan was not an easy person to walk away from once she decided to say something directly to your face. She had grown up in Baltimore, the middle child of 5, raised by a mother who worked double shifts, and a grandmother who believed strong that silence was a form of permission. Imani had learned early that if something was wrong, you said so. If something was unfair, you named it. And if someone was using power to avoid accountability, you stood your ground, until they either had the conversation or proved who they really were. Ji-tae had found this simultaneously maddening and irresistible. He had not been looking for a relationship. He had not been looking for anything beyond maintaining and expanding what he had built. But Imani had a way of looking at him not with fear, which he was accustomed to, and not with calculation, which he was also accustomed to, but with something closer to clear-eyed assessment, like she was deciding whether he was worth her time, and was willing to reach a conclusion that went either way. He had spent 3 years being more honest with her than he had been with anyone in his adult life. Not completely honest. He was not a man capable of complete honesty, and Imani knew that. But more honest than the version of himself that had operated in pure self-interest for so long that self-interest had started to feel like a personality. The pregnancy had been unplanned. Imani had told him in the kitchen at 6 in the morning, holding a test she had taken alone because she needed to know before she knew, if that made any sense. He hadn't said anything for almost a full minute, which she would later describe as the longest 60 seconds of her life. Then he had walked across the kitchen, put both hands on either side of her face, and said, "Then we figure it out." It was the least romantic response imaginable. It was also entirely sincere. That was the thing about Ji-tae. When he said something, he meant it. The question was always whether what he meant was something you could live with. The premature labor was fast and brutal. Her OB, Dr. Lena Park, had been called in immediately, and for the first several hours, things proceeded with controlled urgency, worrying but manageable, every complication met with a practiced response. Ji-tae received updates through the door. He did not pace, because pacing was a form of weakness he refused to perform, but he moved between the window and the wall with the rigid, barely contained energy of a man who needed to be doing something and had nothing to do. Min-guk brought him coffee around hour 5. Ji-tae didn't touch it. "She's strong," Min-guk said. It wasn't hollow comfort. Min-guk had met Imani exactly 47 times, Ji-tae had counted, without fully knowing why, and respected her in that careful way men from that world respected women who didn't intimidate easily. "I know she's strong," Ji-tae said. "The baby will be too." Ji-tae said nothing. He went back to the window. Around hour 7, something shifted. The nurse's movements changed, a subtle tightening of purpose. More personnel entering the delivery room, the particular quality of silence that replaced the ordinary noise of a busy ward. Ji-tae caught Do-yeon's eye. Do-yeon gave a small, careful shake of his head, meaning, "I don't know yet." Then at 11:47, the delivery room doors opened. A doctor stepped out. Not Dr. Park, a man Ji-tae didn't recognize, in surgical scrubs, his face arranged in the expression that medical professionals practice, specifically for moments like this one. "Mr. Kwon," the man said, and from the way he said the name, Ji-tae already knew. He stood completely still while the doctor spoke. He heard the words premature, complications, every effort, deeply sorry, but they seemed to arrive from a distance, like sound traveling through water. His face did not move. His hands did not move. He had spent years training his body not to betray what was happening inside it, and that training held even now. The doctor said the infant had not survived. The doctor said he could go in to be with his wife. The doctor offered to answer any questions. Ji-tae asked none. He walked past the man and through the doors. What he found inside the delivery room was his wife. Imani lay against the elevated hospital bed, her natural hair damp, her eyes open but glassy from medication and exhaustion, and something else. Something Ji-tae recognized as the particular expression of a person whose body has been through something their mind hasn't caught up to yet. She was alive. She was okay. The monitors beside her showed vital signs that were stable, if not strong. He moved to her bedside and took her hand. She turned her head and looked at him. Her eyes were working to focus. On the other side of the room, a nurse, he registered this only in his peripheral vision, the way he registered everything, automatically, without trying, was moving toward the far end of the delivery suite. She had a covered bundle, moving efficiently, moving toward the service exit rather than the main door. Why the service exit? Ji-tae filed it without acting on it. Trauma protocol, he told himself. Privacies. There were procedures for situations like this that he didn't know. Imani's hand closed around his sleeve. Her voice came out as almost nothing. Our baby isn't dead. He looked at her. Her eyes were clearer than he expected. There was something in them that wasn't medication haze or grief, something sharp and desperate and certain. Imani Ji-tae, she tightened her grip. I heard him cry. One cry, before they put something in my IV and everything went sideways. And just now that nurse, her voice cracked, but her eyes stayed locked on his. Ji-tae, I saw his fingers move. He held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he turned. The nurse was gone. The service exit door was already closing. And Min-guk, standing just inside the delivery room doorway where he had followed Ji-tae in, had his phone out, screen tilted slightly away, thumbs moving, deleting something. Ji-tae had not survived 15 years in the criminal ecosystem from the East Kanuskas by ignoring the things that didn't fit. Other men dismissed small inconsistencies. They told themselves they were reading too much into things, that their suspicion was a character flaw rather than a survival tool. That trust was something you demonstrated by choosing not to look too closely. Ji-tae had watched those men lose everything. Some of them had lost their lives. He had cultivated an almost pathological attention to what was out of place, and right now, standing in a delivery room where his infant son had supposedly just died, the list of things that were out of place was growing faster than he could categorize them. The doctor who came out to deliver the news was not Dr. Park, who should have been the one to tell them something this serious. The identification badge on the nurse, who had left through the service exit, had a logo he didn't recognize at a hospital he knew Astercrown had no affiliation with. There was a security camera at the end of the delivery suite corridor. He had noticed it on the way in. The small red indicator light that should have been blinking steadily was dark. Min-guk was still on his phone. Ji-tae said nothing. He went back to Imani's side, took her hand again, and spoke quietly in the voice he used when he needed to communicate something clearly without letting anyone nearby understand the communication. You're sure? I am sure, she said. Her hand was shaking, but her voice wasn't anymore. He squeezed once, let go. He walked to the door and told Min-guk to seal the floor. Min-guk looked at him. Something moved across his face as not confusion, Ji-tae noted. Not the reflexive readiness of a loyal lieutenant. Something more complex than that, and more quickly controlled. Seal the floor, Ji-tae said again, his voice carrying no room for interpretation. Nobody in or out. Not medical staff, not administration, not anybody. You seal it right now, and you come tell me when it's done. Min-guk nodded. He left. Ji-tae watched him go and thought, you are going to tell me everything. But first, he needed to know what everything was. Dooyeon was good at his job because he didn't waste time being surprised. When Ji-tae got him into the corridor and laid it out the nurse, the exit, the badge, the camera, Min-guk's phone, Dooyeon listened with the focused attention of a man mentally sorting information into categories in real time. He didn't push back. He didn't suggest alternative explanations. He pulled out his own device and started working. What he found in the next 40 minutes was this. The security camera covering the delivery suite corridor, along with 4 others on the 7th floor, had been disabled from an internal access point. The footage for the 11 minutes surrounding the delivery was gone. Not corrupted, not malfunctioning, gone. Deliberately erased. The hospital's private transport elevator, which ran separately from the main elevator bank and was used for patient transfers requiring privacy, had been activated during that window. The authorization credential used to access it was issued to the Kwan security team, specifically to CO Min-guk. Do-yoon delivered this quietly, face neutral, eyes giving Ji-tae everything he needed to know about what Do-yoon thought it meant. Ji-tae stood in the hallway outside Imani's room and did not allow himself to feel it yet. Feeling it would come later, in some private moment he couldn't currently afford. Right now he needed to be the version of himself that operated on logic and patience. Has Min-guk asked about the investigation? Ji-tae said. Yes, twice. He framed it as wanting to help narrow down the security breach. Of course he did. Ji-tae looked at the floor, then back up. Pull everything. Every transaction, every communication, every movement Min-guk has logged in the last 6 months. Quietly. Nobody else on the team knows what we're looking at. Already started, Do-yoon said. Ji-tae went back into the room. Imani was more alert. The worst of the medication had started to clear, and she was sitting up slightly, her eyes tracking him as he came through the door. She had the look of a woman who had made a decision while he was gone. Talk to me, she said, so he did. He told her what Do-yoon had found. He watched her face as he said Min-guk's name, and he watched the complicated thing that moved through her expression, not shock, which he found significant. He always made me uncomfortable, Imani said carefully. I never said anything, because I couldn't point to anything specific. He was always too correct, like he was performing something. You should have told me, you trusted him. What was I going to say? I have a feeling? She was right, and they both knew it. Ji-tae sat down in the chair beside the bed. For a moment they were just two people sitting in the ruined aftermath of an hour that had gone entirely wrong. Then Ji-tae's phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. It was a photograph. His son alive, small, frighteningly small, lying in a neonatal incubator with a tube and a sensor, and the pink and furious look of a newborn fighting his way into the world. One eye slightly more open than the other, fingers curled. Chest moving, alive. The text beneath the photograph was direct and short. 3 shipping terminals. Full operational control transferred within 72 hours. Plus a complete documentation package on the Kwan organization's criminal operations, accounts, contacts, supply routes, everything held in escrow, and released to federal authorities if the transfer didn't happen on schedule. Ji-tae stared at the photograph for a long time. His son's fingers. Moving. He went back to the photograph and looked at it properly. This time not at the baby, but at the image itself. The incubator. The equipment around it. The small, reflective surface of the incubator's glass panel, and what was visible in that reflection. Part of a face. Partially cut off, the lower half only. But distinctive enough. The jaw and the cheek, and the particular scar beneath the left ear that CO Min-guk had gotten in 2014 from a piece of broken glass during an encounter that Ji-tae had pulled him out of personally. Ji-tae had given him 3 stitches himself in the back of that car. He knew that scar better than Min-guk probably thought anyone would. He set the phone down on the edge of the bed. He looked at Imani. She looked back at him and read his face the way she had learned to read it over 3 years of paying careful attention. He's alive, Ji-tae said, her eyes closed just for a second. I know, she whispered, and Min-guk is still downstairs. She opened her eyes. Ji-tae picked the phone back up. I need you to trust me, he said. Can you do that for the next few hours? Imani looked at him for a moment, not deciding whether to trust him, but deciding whether to say what she was thinking. Ji-tae, she said, there's something else. About Min-guk. About why he really did this. She paused. I found something during the pregnancy. In the accounts. I didn't want to tell you until I was sure. He went still. Tell me now, she told him. And Ji-tae, who had believed he understood the full geometry of his own betrayal, discovered that he had only seen the surface of it. He was quiet for a long time after she finished. Then he stood up. Don't let him know you remember anything from tonight, he said. She held his eyes. I know how to play a room, Imani said quietly. He almost smiled. Under different circumstances, he would have. He walked out of the room, down the corridor, past the nurse's station, and found Min-guk near the elevator bank, arms crossed, every line of his body communicating a loyal man's frustrated helplessness. "Any leads?" Min-guk asked. His voice was exactly right. The worry, the restrained urgency. 15 years of performing this man, and he had never slipped once. Until tonight. "Nothing concrete yet," Ji-tae said. He made sure his own face was giving back exactly the right amount grief-adjacent numbness, the flatness of a man still in shock. "Go home. Get a few hours. I need you sharp tomorrow." Min-guk hesitated in a way that was almost imperceptible. "You sure? I can go," Ji-tae said. "I'll call you." Min-guk nodded. He pressed Ji-tae's shoulder briefly, the gesture of an old friend, and walked toward the elevator. Ji-tae stood and watched him go. He watched until the elevator doors had fully closed. Then he pulled out his phone and called Do-yun. "Follow him," he said. "Don't let him see you. And find my son." Do-yun called back in 22 minutes. That was fast, which meant what he had found was either very clean or very bad. With Do-yun, the speed of the callback had always been an indicator. The longer he took, the more complicated the picture. 22 minutes meant the trail was visible. Somebody had not been careful enough, or had not expected anyone to look this quickly. Ji-tae stepped into the empty family consultation room at the end of the 7th floor corridor and closed the door behind him. The room smelled like stale coffee and the particular antiseptic sadness of spaces designed to deliver bad news. He stood near the wall rather than sitting. "Talk," he said. "Min-guk didn't go home," Do-yun said. "He went to a parking structure on West 38th. Sat in his car for 11 minutes. Made 2 calls, both to numbers we don't have on record. Then he drove to a restaurant in Koreatown, sat at the bar, ordered nothing, and waited for 20 minutes before a man I don't recognize came in and sat beside him. They talked for less than 5 minutes. The man left first. Description: late 50s, heavy build. He's got a scar that runs along the right side of his jaw, old, probably knife. He walked like someone who's used to being in charge of rooms. Not nervous, not cautious, like he owned the sidewalk he was standing on. Ji-tae knew before he finished the sentence. "Baek Songhwan," he said. A pause on the line. "You're sure?" "I've seen photographs." "We've never met directly." Ji-tae's voice came out flat and careful, the way his voice always came out when he was compressing something large into something manageable. "Baek runs the Cheongju syndicate out of Flushing. We've had territorial friction for 3 years, never open conflict. I always thought he was smart enough to know direct confrontation wasn't worth the cost. Apparently he found a cheaper option," Do-yun said. "Neither of them," said Min-guk's name. "They didn't need to." G.T. stared at the wall. There was a laminated poster on it about hospital support services, phone numbers for counseling, for grief, for practical assistance in difficult moments. He looked at it without reading it. "The baby," Ji-tae said. "Still working on location. The transport elevator exited into the loading dock. On the basement level, there's a service road that connects to West End Avenue. We pulled what street camera footage we could access. A private medical transport van unmarked. No plates visible left the dock at 11:53 p.m. heading north. A private neonatal transport. Yes. Whoever planned this had a setup ready for a premature infant. That's not improvised. That took weeks of preparation." Another pause. Ji-tae. This was not a plan that came together after Imani's water broke. They were waiting for the delivery. Ji-tae absorbed that. Weeks of preparation. Someone inside the hospital, or with access to the hospital. Medical equipment staged in advance. A doctor who wasn't doctor. Park. A nurse who didn't belong on the floor. Security credentials stolen from the inside. Surveillance systems mapped and disabled on a schedule. And Min-guk, who knew the security protocols surrounding Imani because Ji-tae had trusted him to help design them. "Pull everything on Baek's operation," Ji-tae said. "I want to know every property he has access to in a 30-mile radius, warehouses, clinics, private facilities, anything that could support a neonatal setup. And get me Dr. Park. Directly. Not through the hospital administration." "On it." Do-yun hesitated. "Imani? She's okay." The words came out and Ji-tae recognized that they were both true and entirely inadequate. She's okay. Keep that floor locked down. Nobody who doesn't have my direct authorization moves on or off it." He ended the call. He stood in the consultation room for a moment longer than he needed to. Just a moment. Long enough to acknowledge, in some private interior space he rarely visited, that the thing happening right now was the thing he had always known, in some low and honest part of himself, would eventually come. Not this specific thing. He couldn't have predicted this specific thing, but the general shape of it. The version of consequences that arrived through the people you trusted, instead of the enemies you watched. He had trusted Min-guk because the evidence of 15 years had told him to. He had been reading the evidence correctly. Was that evidence could be manufactured by someone patient enough to build it piece by piece over a decade and a half. He straightened his jacket, opened the door, and walked back to his wife's room. Imani was not asleep. She had pushed herself upright, despite the nurse's earlier instruction to stay flat, and she had the particular expression she wore when she had been thinking hard about something and had arrived at a conclusion she wasn't sure she wanted to share. Ji-tae had seen that expression enough times to recognize it from the doorway. He came in, closed the door, and sat in the chair without saying anything first. "Min-guk met with someone tonight," he said. "A man named Baek Song-hwan. Rival organization. We've had history, but I always believed it was manageable." He looked at her directly. "Tell me what you found in the accounts." All of it this time. From the beginning, Imani's hands were in her lap. She looked down at them, then back at him. "About 4 months ago," she said, "I started going through the financial records for Kwan Maritime Solutions. I know you don't want me involved in the business, but I was bored and I was careful, and I'm good with numbers, you know that. I found a pattern. Outgoing transfers, small amounts, spread across 7 different subsidiary accounts so they wouldn't flag an automatic threshold review. Irregular timing, but consistent destination routing. They were passing through what looked like a legitimate freight invoicing company before disappearing. How much total? Over 14 months? Around 2.3 million. Ji-tae was quiet. "I know," she said, "not enormous by your standards. But it wasn't about the amount. It was the structure. Whoever set it up knew exactly how your compliance protocols worked. They knew the threshold limits, and they knew the review schedule." She paused. "So I called your accountant, not Lee, the other one. Chung and I asked him to trace the destination. I told him it was a routine audit question. I didn't tell him what I was actually looking at." "What did Chung find?" He didn't get to finish. She met his eyes steadily. "He called me back 3 days later and told me he couldn't help me with this one." He sounded scared, Ji-tae. Not uncomfortable. Scared. "And then he stopped returning my calls." Ji-tae felt the shape of it settling into place. The transfers, Chung going silent, Min-guk's access to the compliance protocols. And then, 4 months later, a premature labor in a hospital that Min-guk had helped secure, from which a newborn infant was removed through a service exit using Min-guk's credentials. "He found out you were looking," Ji-tae said. "I think so. I think Chung told someone, or someone was already watching Chung, and word got back." She paused. "I should have told you immediately. I know that. I was going to tell you once I had something solid, something you couldn't dismiss. I wouldn't have dismissed it, Ji-tae." Her voice was steady, but the word carried weight. "You trusted that man like a brother. I had a spreadsheet anomaly and a scared accountant. What exactly would you have done with that?" He didn't answer. Because she was right, and they both knew it, and saying so wasn't going to help anything right now. "The transfers were going to Baek's network," Ji-tae said. "It wasn't a question, I think so. The freight company they routed through, I found a corporate registration record that links it to a holding company in New Jersey. The name on the holding company is a woman named Sun Yu-ri." She watched his face. "Does that name mean something to you?" "Baek's sister-in-law," Ji-tae said. Imani closed her eyes for just a second. "So it's been going on for over a year," she said. "At least." Ji-tae sat back in the chair. "Min-guk has been funding Baek's operation with money from mine. Building an alliance from the inside, and the kidnapping." He stopped. "The kidnapping wasn't just leverage," Imani said, finishing it for him. "If they declared Eli dead and moved him out of the country, there was no birth certificate, no legal record, no child to trace. You'd be looking for someone who officially doesn't exist. And in the meantime, you'd be grieving, destabilized, and Min-guk would be right there to help you through it. The silence that followed lasted a long time. He was going to take over the organization, Ji-tae said. Eventually, with Baek's backing and enough time, she looked at her hands again. I think he's been planning this since before I was in the picture. But the pregnancy gave him a deadline. Once there was a child, a legitimate heir, someone who changes the whole succession dynamic, the window started closing. He had to move. Ji-tae stood up. Slowly, he walked to the window and stood with his back to her for a moment. Outside, the rain had not let up. The city below was a blur of wet light and motion, indifferent to everything happening on the 7th floor of Astor Crown Medical Center. He's been performing loyalty for 15 years, Ji-tae said quietly. Every time I needed someone. Every time something went wrong. He showed up. I know, Imani said. He was building a record. He turned back toward her. His face was controlled, but not quite. Controlled enough, there was something underneath it that Imani recognized as the specific kind of pain that comes from being deceived by someone you genuinely loved, which was different from anger and harder to manage. Everything he did that looked like loyalty. Every risk he appeared to take for me. He was making a deposit. Yes. So when he finally withdrew it, the account would be full. Imani said nothing. She let him land on it without softening it. Ji-tae looked at the floor. Then he looked back at her. I need you to do something hard, he said. I'm already doing something hard, she said. What is it? Getting Dr. Lana Park into the hospital without announcing her return took 40 minutes in Do-yeon's particular talent for persuasion that didn't leave marks. Park arrived through the staff entrance at 2:15 a.m., still in street clothes, its expression carrying the compressed agitation of someone who had been told very little and understood, from the telling that the very little was the safest amount to tell her over the phone. She was 52, Korean-American, third generation, and had been Imani's OB for the duration of the pregnancy, after Ji-tae had conducted what Imani described as an unreasonably thorough vetting process. Ji-tae met her in the consultation room. Park sat down. Ji-tae didn't. The physician who came out to notify me of my son's death, Ji-tae said. I need his name and everything your hospital has on him. Park stared at him. He was on the delivery rotation. He was not on your delivery team, Ji-tae said. You were inside that room until you weren't. When did you leave, and who replaced you? Park's face changed. Not guilt, something more complex. The expression of a person beginning to understand that something they participated in was different from what they believed it was. I was called out, she said slowly. There was a patient emergency 2 rooms down. A nurse came in and said it was critical that the attending needed me specifically because of a cardiac complication during delivery. I handed off to doctor. She stopped. He said his name was Doctor. Woo! He had credentials. He was in scrubs. He had a hospital badge. What hospital? She blinked, asked her crown. Same as mine. Are you certain you read it? A long pause. I saw the badge. I didn't read it specifically. Everything was moving fast. The emergency 2 rooms down. There was no patient emergency 2 rooms down, Do-yeon said from the doorway where he had positioned himself with his phone open to the floor's intake log. Room 712 was empty all evening, occupied by a patient discharged at 4 p.m. Park looked at him, then back at Ji-tae. I was pulled out of the room deliberately, she said. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then your son is alive, Ji-tae said. Taken from this facility using a forged death certification and my organization's own security credentials. I need to know every person who had access to your patient schedule for tonight. Every staff member who knew Imani was delivering here, what the security protocols on this floor were, and what the standard procedure is for handling a stillbirth in this unit. Park's jaw was set. She was scared he could see it, but she was also angry, and the anger was winning. I'll give you everything I have, she said. It was past 3 in the morning when Min-guk called. Ji-tae had been expecting it. He had sent Min-guk home and watched him go and had been counting down ever since, because Min-guk was not a man who would be able to stay away from the situation he had created. He would need to monitor. He would need to position himself close enough to observe without being seen observing. Ji-tae answered on the second ring. I heard from Doyun that you pulled Park in, Min-guk said. His voice was good. The concern in it was almost indistinguishable from the real thing. That's smart. She might have noticed something. Maybe, Ji-tae said. How's Imani doing? She's sleeping. He said it smoothly without pause. The medication finally caught up with her. She doesn't remember much from the delivery. Doctor says that's probably protective. He let a bead of silence fall, then said, I'm going to accept the terms. A pause on the other end of the line, brief. Almost nothing. What terms? Min-guk asked. Whoever took him sent a message, Ji-tae said. 3 terminals and documentation. I'm going to give it to them. Ji-tae. Min-guk's voice shifted urgency now, carefully constructed. You can't do that. That's everything you've built. If you surrender those terminals and hand them a documentation package, you're finished. You'd be handing them the keys to the whole operation. My son is alive, Ji-tae said simply. What would you do? Another pause. Longer this time. Ji-tae could hear Min-guk recalibrating, moving pieces around, adjusting. Let me help you look for him first, Min-guk said. Before you give anything up, let me use my contacts. See what I can pull from the waterfront. Transport had to go somewhere accessible for a medical setup. Give me 24 hours. 12, Ji-tae said. 12 hours, Min-guk. Then I sign. Whatever I have to sign. He kept his voice tired. Broken. The performance of a man who had used up everything he had and was running on nothing. Come back in at 6. I want you here. I'll be there, Min-guk said immediately. Of course he would. Ji-tae ended the call and sat still for a moment. Then he sent Do-yoon a text. With 3 words, he took the bait. At 4 a.m., Imani asked a nurse to leave the room, and then looked at Ji-tae from across the space between the hospital bed and the chair where he had been sitting for the past hour. You're going to let him walk back in here, she said. Yes, and you're not going to touch him. Not yet. She was quiet for a moment. The monitors hummed. Through the window, the rain had finally started to thin, the storm breaking up against the edges of the horizon. The city was still dark, but the darkness had a different quality. Now, the quality that comes just before the first gray light of morning starts pulling itself up from the east. Ji-tae, she said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to actually answer me. Okay, when this is over, when we get Eli back, and this is resolved, who are you going to be? He looked at her. I mean it, she said, because right now you're the version of yourself that handles problems. And I know how that version handles problems. But we have a son, and I need to know what kind of world he's coming home to. Ji-tae was quiet for long enough that she started to wonder if he was going to answer. I don't know yet, he said finally. It was the most honest thing he had said all night. Maybe in years. Imani looked at him for a long time. Then she leaned her head back against the pillow and closed her eyes. Get our son back, she said. Then we'll talk about the rest. He nodded, even though she couldn't see it. Do-youn's team found the clinic at 5:47 a.m. An abandoned private neonatal care facility on the Hudson waterfront, one of 3 properties that came up when Do-youn cross-referenced Baek's known as real estate holdings with facilities that had been permitted for medical use in the past 8 years. The other 2 had been too visible, too accessible. This one had been listed as decommissioned for 4 years, which meant it had dropped out of active inspection cycles. The utilities were still connected. The loading access from the Riverside Service Road meant vehicles could come and go without being visible from the main street. Do-youn sent Ji-tae the address, along with satellite imagery, showing 2 vehicles in the back lot. Ji-tae looked at the image for a long moment. His son was in that building. He was certain of it the way he was certain of very few things, a bone-deep, irrational certainty that didn't need evidence to justify itself. He called Do-youn. Don't move on it yet, he said. Understood. Why? Because Min-guk walks back through this door in less than 30 minutes. And I need him to be here when we go. Do-youn absorbed that. You want him to watch. I want him to understand the exact dimensions of what he did, Ji-tae said. And I want there to be no ambiguity about who is responsible for what happens next. That's personal. Yes, Ji-tae said, it is. Min-guk arrived at 6:03 a.m. He had changed clothes and he had slept, or at least spent time horizontal, because his eyes were clearer than they had been at 11 p.m. He had also, Ji-tae noticed, taken extra care with his appearance, jacket pressed, shoes clean, which was the tell of a man who was preparing for something he considered important. Today was going to be the day he had been building toward for 15 years. Ji-tae was standing in the corridor when Min-guk stepped off the elevator. He watched his lieutenant walk toward him. Familiar face, familiar walk, 15 years of shared history, moving across a hospital floor toward a reckoning that Min-guk didn't yet know was waiting for him. "How is she?" "I'm awake," Ji-tae said. "She wants to see you." Something crossed Min-guk's face. Very fast. Gone almost before it arrived. "Of course," he said. They walked down the corridor together. Ji-tae matched his pace, said nothing. Let the silence be ordinary rather than charged. He had become, in the last few hours, entirely comfortable with what was about to happen. The part of him that had needed time to absorb the betrayal had absorbed it. What remained was something colder and more purposeful. He opened the door to Imani's room and stepped back to let Min-guk enter first. Imani was sitting up in the bed. She had asked the nurse to remove one of the monitors she didn't need, and she had smoothed the blanket across her lap, with that particular composure that Ji-tae had always found remarkable in her, the ability to make even a hospital room feel like somewhere she was choosing to be. She was wearing the small stud earrings she never took off. Her hands were folded. Min-guk walked in carrying the flowers he had stopped to buy, carnations, white from the hospital gift shop, because every detail mattered to a man who had spent 15 years making every detail correct. He held them out with an expression of careful, calibrated grief. "Imani," he said, "I'm so sorry, I can't imagine." "Sit down, Min-guk," she said. Her voice was completely level. He stopped. Something shifted in his posture, a barely perceptible tightening. "Sit down," she said again. He sat in the chair beside the bed. The flowers were still in his hand. He set them on the bedside table. Imani looked at him without any of the things he expected to see: grief, medication blur, the softening that comes from trauma and exhaustion. She looked at him with clear, direct, fully present eyes. "You were in the delivery room," she said. Not a question. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 4 seconds. 4 seconds in which Ji-tae watched 15 years of construction begin to crack along every joint. "Imani, you were there," she said. "I saw the nurse you sent in. I saw the badge. I heard my son cry. And then someone adjusted my IV. And when I looked up, you were standing in the doorway." Min-guk's face went through something complicated and fast, and then settled into a version of itself that Ji-tae had never seen before, stripped of the performance, absent the calculation, just the bare and somewhat diminished face of a man who had run out of moves. He looked toward the door. The door was already closed. Do-yeon was standing against the wall beside it, arms at his side, with the particular qualities of stillness that communicated everything Min-guk needed to understand about whether leaving was an option. Min-guk looked back at Ji-tae. Ji-tae looked back at him. And for the first time in 15 years of shared history, there was no version of this moment that Min-guk could shape to his advantage. "Where is my son?" Ji-tae said. It was not loud. It did not need to be loud. Min-guk set his jaw. He said nothing, and the silence that followed was the point past which nothing between them could ever go back to what it had been. Min-guk sat with the flowers on the table beside him and said nothing for a long time. The room had the quality of a held breath. Do-yeon hadn't moved from the wall. Imani hadn't moved from the bed. Ji-tae stood in the center of the room with his hands at his sides and waited, because he had learned a long time ago that silence was the most effective pressure you could apply to a person who was trying to calculate their remaining options. Silence gave them nothing to push against. It just kept building until the weight of it became unbearable. Min-guk's jaw was set. His hands were in his lap, still, controlled. The hands of a man who had spent 15 years learning to keep his body from betraying what was happening inside it. He had learned that from Ji-tae. He had learned most things from Ji-tae, which was part of what made this room so particular in its ugliness. "You already know," Min-guk said finally. His voice was flat. Not apologetic, not aggressive, flat, in the way of a man who has decided that the performance is over. I know enough, Ji-tae said. I want the rest from you. Min-guk looked at Imani. Something moved through his expression that was not quite shame and not quite contempt, but sat somewhere in the complicated territory between them. You found the transfers, he said. 4 months ago, Imani said. And you didn't tell him. I was building a case. Min-guk made a sound not quite a laugh, short and humorless. Smart, too smart. He looked back at Ji-tae. Chung came to me. He didn't know what he had, but he was nervous, and nervous accountants make noise, so I had a conversation with him. He understood what was being asked of him. Where is Chung now? Ji-tae asked. Alive, uncomfortable, not in the city. Min-guk said it without inflection. Fact, not confession. Ji-tae absorbed it, filed it. Moved on, my son, he said, where Min-guk looked at his own hands. He turned them over once slowly, then set them flat on his thighs. He looked up. I'm not telling you that, he said. The temperature of the room changed. Imani felt it a drop, sudden and physical, like something had been removed from the air. Ji-tae took 3 steps toward Min-guk and crouched down in front of him so they were at eye level. He did it slowly, without urgency, which was somehow worse than if he had moved fast. Up close, Min-guk could see that Ji-tae's eyes were not the eyes of a man in crisis. They were the eyes of a man who had finished processing the crisis and had arrived somewhere on the other side of it that was very quiet and very resolved. Min-guk, Ji-tae said. His voice was low. You have been in this organization for 15 years. You have sat in rooms with me where terrible things were decided. You know what I am capable of when something belongs to me and someone takes it. Min-guk held his gaze. His jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. So you understand, Ji-tae continued, that I am not asking you this question as a man who is hoping for your cooperation. I am telling you that you will tell me where my son is, and the only thing you are deciding right now is what happens to you before you do. A long silence. Min-guk breathed through his nose. Once, twice. Then he said, There's a deadline. Ji-tae didn't move. What kind of deadline? Baek moves him at 8 a.m. If he doesn't receive confirmation from me that the terminal transfer documentation has been initiated, the protocol changes. Min-guk paused. I don't know the full protocol. I was kept out of that part deliberately. Baek doesn't trust anyone completely, not even me. Baek doesn't trust you, Ji-tae said. He used me. That's different from trusting me. Something shifted in Min-guk's expression, the first genuinely unguarded thing Ji-tae had seen from him all night. You think I was running this? I brought him the access and the inside information and the security architecture. He planned the rest. The medical team, the van, the facility, that was all Baek. The transfers, Imani said from the bed. The money you moved to his operation. Investment, Min-guk said, turning to look at her. I needed him to take the organization once Ji-tae was out. I couldn't hold it alone. I don't have the connections outside the East Coast. I don't have the international relationships. Baek has Hong Kong and Busan and 3 pipeline routes I could never build from scratch. He paused. I was going to run domestic operations. Baek would handle the international side. It was a sound partnership. You stole my son to fund a partnership, Imani said. I took leverage, Min-guk said. The child was never going to be harmed. The room went very still. Imani looked at him for a moment with an expression that Ji-tae recognized as the one she wore when she was deciding whether to say the devastating thing or the measured thing. She chose the devastating thing. You took a premature infant out of a hospital in the middle of the night in a van, she said. In a rainstorm, at 31 weeks gestation. And you want to tell me he was never going to be harmed. Min-guk said nothing. If that incubator lost power for 20 minutes, she said, he would be dead. If they hit traffic and the transport took too long, he could have been dead. If whoever is handling him right now doesn't know what they're doing, if his temperature drops, if his oxygen levels fall, if any one of 100 things goes wrong that go wrong with premature babies in controlled hospital environments, he could already be. Her voice cracked, just once, and she stopped and pressed her lips together and gathered it back. Min-guk looked at the floor. Where's my son? Ji-tae said again. Min-guk lifted his head. His eyes were tired in a way that went deeper than one sleepless night. They were the eyes of a man who had been running a version of himself that required enormous energy for a very long time, and who was running out of whatever resource that required. Hudson Reach Clinic, he said. Decommission facility, 1140 Riverside Service Road. You'll need to come in from the north access. There are 2 men on the south entrance, and they have instructions not to let anyone through after 7 a.m. regardless of what authorization they show. Ji-tae stood up. He looked at Do-yun. Do-yun was already on his phone. Everything that happened in the next 4 minutes moved very fast and then came apart. Do-yun confirmed the address matched their satellite location. He called the 2 men he had positioned on the waterfront perimeter and gave them the north access point. He started coordinating the approach. Ji-tae turned back to Min-guk. How many men does Baek have inside? 4 when I was last briefed. That was yesterday afternoon. He may have moved additional people in overnight. Medical staff? 1. A neonatal nurse. Older woman, she's worked with Baek before she knows how to keep quiet, and she knows what she's doing. The baby has been stable. He said it like it was supposed to help. Ji-tae turned away from him. Then Do-yun's phone made a sound that was not the sound it was supposed to make. Do-yun looked at the screen. He looked at it for 1 second too long, which told Ji-tae everything before Do-yun said a word. The north access, Do-yun said carefully. My men got there 60 seconds ago. He paused. The gate is open. Both vehicles that were in the satellite image are gone. Ji-tae turned back to Min-guk so fast that Min-guk flinched backward in the chair. When did Baek move the deadline? Ji-tae said. I told you 8 a.m. When did he move it? I don't know that he did. Do-yun, Ji-tae said. The facility is empty, Do-yun said, his voice measured and precise. The voice of a man delivering information he knows is going to land badly. They cleared out. My team is inside now. The incubator is still there. Still powered, still running, but the infant is not in it. The word infant landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Imani made a sound. Just one short, involuntary, the sound of someone taking a blow they weren't braced for. Ji-tae stood in the center of the room and didn't move for 3 seconds. His face showed nothing. The nothing on his face was the most frightening thing Min-guk had ever seen in 15 years of working for a man who was not prone to ordinary emotional displays. He knew, Ji-tae said, not to anyone specific, just putting it into the air. Someone warned him, Do-yun said. Ji-tae turned slowly back to Min-guk. Min-guk had gone pale. His hands had tightened on his thighs. I didn't, he started. Your phone, Ji-tae said. What? When did you last use your phone? I in the car on the way here. Min-guk stopped. His eyes changed. Something was working across his face that looked almost like genuine alarm, which Ji-tae found interesting. I called Baek's secondary contact. To tell him the terminal documentation was being initiated, I was trying to buy time, to keep the deadline in place, while You called him, Ji-tae said. To maintain the protocol. I had to, or the deadline would. You called him 20 minutes ago, from the car on your way back into this building. Ji-tae's voice had gone so quiet that Imani had to focus to hear it. And you told him the documentation was moving forward. Which meant there was no longer a reason to hold the location. Min-guk opened his mouth, closed it. You didn't warn him directly, Ji-tae said. You removed his reason to stay. The distinction was almost philosophical, and it didn't matter at all. Baek Sung-hwan had moved the infant. He had moved him before Ji-tae's team reached the clinic, and he had done it because Min-guk's call, intended to preserve the timeline, intended to buy Ji-tae more hours, had instead signaled that the situation was changing, and a careful man always moved his leverage when the situation changed. Imani pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. She was not crying. She was doing something harder than crying. She was sitting with the information and not letting it break her, because breaking right now meant she would be useless, and she could not afford to be useless. Ji-tae walked to the window. He stood there with his back to the room. Min-guk started to say something. Do-yun's look stopped him before the first word was out. The silence in that room was enormous. Ji-tae spent 90 seconds at that window, doing something that looked like nothing, and was in fact the most difficult thing he had done all night. He was dismantling the version of the plan that had existed 60 minutes ago and rebuilding from what remained. He was doing it without the luxury of privacy or time. In a room that contained his hospitalized wife, the man who had destroyed him from the inside, and a security chief waiting for direction. He turned around. Du-yun. Baek has 2 vehicles. What do we know about his movement protocols? He doesn't use the same route twice when transporting anything valuable. He'll have a secondary location, probably scouted in advance. Given the time and the rain and the fact that he's moving a medical setup, Du-yun was already working through it. He won't go far. The incubator equipment limits him. He needs power, climate control, someone to monitor the infant. He can't put all of that on a moving vehicle for more than 40 minutes without risk. So he has a second facility, has to, then find it. Ji-tae looked at Min-guk. You're going to help him. Min-guk stared. I don't know where the secondary... You know Baek's operation, Ji-tae said. You've been in business with him for over a year. You know how he thinks, what he values, what he's afraid of. You are going to sit with Do-yun, and you are going to give him every property, every contact, every resource and preference and pattern of behavior you observed over 14 months, until we find a location that fits. He paused. This is the only thing you're doing with whatever time you have left. Are we clear? Min-guk looked at him for a moment. The fight, whatever was left of it, was gone from his face. Clear, he said quietly. Du-yun took Min-guk out of the room. Ji waited until the door closed. Then he walked back to Imani's bedside and sat down in the chair and put his forearms on his knees and looked at her directly. Talk to me, he said. She lowered her hand from her mouth. Her eyes were dry, but only just. He's out there, she said. He's alive. If Baek wanted him dead, he'd be dead already. Yes, he needs him alive. He's leverage. Leverage doesn't work if it's gone. You're right. So stop looking at me like I might break, she said, and figure out where Baek took him. Ji-tae almost said something. Then he just nodded. The next hour was the worst kind of work, the kind that requires absolute precision while moving under conditions that make precision nearly impossible. Du-yun ran Min-guk through Baek's known and suspected properties, cross-referencing against utility connections that could support medical equipment, ruling out locations that were too public or too far from the waterfront. Min-guk gave what he had, which turned out to be more than Ji-tae had expected, either because Min-guk was genuinely trying to correct what his phone call had accidentally done, or because he understood that his remaining value in this situation was directly proportional to his usefulness. Ji-tae stayed with Imani and worked his own phone. He had 3 contacts he had never called for anything personal, men who owed him debts of the kind that didn't expire. He called all 3 before 7 a.m. He didn't explain. He gave them Baek's description, the vehicle types Do-yun had flagged, and the waterfront corridor between 96th Street and the bridge. He told them to call if they saw anything that looked like a medical transport moving quietly. At 7:23 a.m., one of them called back. A dark panel van with reinforced rear doors had pulled into a private parking structure on 134th Street near the river. The structure was attached to a building that had been a dialysis center 8 years ago and had been purchased through a corporate intermediary in 2021. The building had a functioning generator hookup in the basement level. Ji-tae told Do-yun. Do-yun confirmed the corporate ownership traced back through 2 shells to a company with a Flushing address registered to a man named Park Tae-won, who was, according to Do-yun's records, Baek Seong-hwan's former logistics director. They had a location, and then the second thing happened. The thing that broke the plan open from a direction Ji-tae hadn't guarded. His phone rang at 7:31 a.m. The number was blocked, which was not unusual for the kind of calls he received. He answered. Mr. Kwan, a woman's voice. Controlled, professional, American accented. My name is Special Agent Dana Reyes. I'm with the FBI's Organized Crime Division. I apologize for the hour. Ji-tae went very still. I'm going to ask you to listen to me for 60 seconds before you decide whether to hang up, Reyes said. Can you do that? He said nothing, which was answer enough. We've had Baek Song-hwan under investigation for 18 months, she said. Last night, we picked up activity associated with his network that suggested a major operation was in progress. We've been monitoring. We know about the infant. We know where Bake is right now. Then why are you calling me? Ji-tae said. Because we want Bake, she said. Not your son. Not you, not today. Bake is the target of a federal investigation that goes well beyond what happened last night. If you go into that building with your people, in the next 30 minutes you will either get your son killed in the confrontation, get your own people killed, or compromise an 18-month federal case that puts Bake away for the rest of his life, rather than just this operation. A pause. Mr. Kwan, I am asking you to stand down and let us do this correctly. Ji-tae stood by the window of Imani's room. Outside, the sky was the pale, washed-out gray of early morning after heavy rain. The city was starting to move buses, garbage trucks, the first ordinary noise of a world that had no idea what was happening in a private maternity room on the 7th floor of a midtown hospital. How do I know you won't use whatever you see in there to build a case against me? He said. You don't, Reyes said. I won't insult you by pretending otherwise. What I can tell you is that walking your armed people into a building currently occupied by Bake and at least 6 men gives you a very specific set of possible outcomes, none of which include a safe infant. Another pause. I have a team ready to move. We go in clean, we go in right, and your son comes out of that building breathing. That's the only thing that matters to you this morning. Isn't it? The line was quiet. Ji-tae looked at Imani. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she was watching his face with the focused attention of someone reading a TCIT, text they haven't been given direct access to. I need something from you, Ji-tae said. If it's within my authority. The man currently in my security chief's custody. Seo Min-guk, he has information on Bake's operation that extends well beyond last night. Ji-tae paused. If I give you Min-guk and everything he knows, what happens to the conversation about my organization? A pause on the other end, longer than the previous pauses. I can't make promises. I don't have the authority to keep, Reyes said. I'm not asking for promises, Ji-tae said. I'm asking what the conversation looks like. Another pause. The conversation becomes significantly less urgent, she said finally. Ji-tae processed that. Give me 10 minutes, he said. He ended the call. He looked at Imani and told her everything in 30 seconds. Her face moved through 3 different expressions and settled on something that was not happiness and not relief, but was the particular expression of a woman who has arrived at a decision she doesn't entirely like and has decided to accept it anyway because it's the right one. Call her back, Imani said. I'm going to have to give them Min-guk. I know. That means the courts. That means whatever he knows about this organization goes into a federal record. Ji-tae. She looked at him steadily, called her back. Get our son out of that building. He nodded. He dialed. But before he could finish the call, Do-yun appeared in the doorway. His face had the particular quality that Ji-tae had learned over years to read as controlled, alarm-kind Do-yun, reserved for situations that had moved past the edge of what they had prepared for. Problem, Do-yun said. Ji-tae raised a hand at the phone. 1 minute, Ji-tae. Do-yun almost never used his name without a title. The use of it now cut through everything. Min-guk is gone. Ji-tae lowered the phone. What do you mean gone? He asked to use the bathroom in the consultation room. I was 2 feet from the door. The window in that bathroom. Do-yun's jaw was tight. Ground access to the parking structure. It was gone before I got through the door. Ji-tae stood absolutely still. He's going to Bake, Imani said from the bed. Or he's running, Do-yun said. He's not running, Ji-tae said. He has nowhere to run to. Everything he built depends on Bake delivering what they agreed on. He looked at Do-yun. He's going to warn him. He's going to walk into that building and tell Bake that the FBI is coming and try to salvage whatever he can from this. Do-yun said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Ji-tae raised the phone back to his ear. Agent Reyes, he said. Your timeline just changed. Min-guk is moving toward the building. He knows your team is coming. A sharp intake of breath on the other end. Then controlled, rapid movement, he could hear it. Voices in the background. The shift from standing operation to active response. How long ago? Reyes said. 3 minutes. Maybe 4. We're moving, she said. Mr. Kwan, stay where you are. Do not come to that location. She ended the call. Ji-tae lowered the phone. He looked at Do-yun. Do-yun looked back at him. Imani had her hands pressed flat against the blanket on her lap, knuckles white, chin lifted, every part of her body performing the same act of controlled stillness that she held together, dazed the way she held herself together, not by suppressing what she felt, but by deciding, moment by moment, not to let it take the wheel. He's in that building, Ji-tae said quietly. Not the baby, he couldn't say the baby. He's in that building, and Minguk just walked into it, and in 4 minutes a federal team is going to hit the door, and Baek Song-hwan is going to know he has nothing left to lose. The words fell into the room, and nobody disputed them. Because a man with nothing left to lose and a premature infant in his possession was the most dangerous possible combination of facts, and all three of them understood it. And there was not a single move left available to Ji-tae that didn't require trusting someone he had no established reason to trust, an FBI agent he had spoken to for 90 seconds. A situation he could not control. An outcome he could not guarantee through any amount of money or force or carefully built leverage. He sat down in the chair beside Imani's bed. She reached out without looking at him and put her hand over his. Her hand was steady. His was not. And Ji-tae, who had built 15 years of power on the foundational principle that he controlled the outcome of every situation that mattered to him, sat in a hospital chair with his wife's hand over his trembling one and faced the full dimensions of what it meant to be completely, irrevocably out of moves. Ji-tae sat in that chair for exactly 90 seconds. He counted them, not consciously, not deliberately, but because some part of his mind had never stopped running the clock, even when everything else was falling apart. 90 seconds of sitting, with his wife's hand over his, and the full weight of having no moves left pressing down on him, like something physical. Then he stood up. Imani looked at him. Ji-tae, I'm not going to sit here, he said. Reyes said, I know what she said. He was already moving, pulling his jacket off the back of the chair, checking his phone. She said, don't come to the location. She didn't say I had to stay in this room and wait for a phone call that tells me whether my son is alive. That is exactly what she said, Imani. He stopped. He turned and looked at her. Really looked at her, the way he hadn't fully allowed himself to do since she had grabbed his sleeve in the delivery room, because looking at her green wood splitting. Looking at her fully meant feeling everything that was riding on what happened in the next hour, and feeling everything would make him slower and less effective, and he could not afford either. Do-yun stays here. 2 men on your door. Nobody comes in or out without my direct authorization. Not a nurse, not an administrator, not anyone. You do not open that door for anyone. She held his gaze. You said you were going to trust Reyes. I'm trusting her to do her job, he said. I'm not trusting her to care about my son the way I do. Those are different things. She didn't argue, because she knew he was right, and because she knew him well enough to understand that this was not a decision she was going to talk him out of. And because some part of her, the part that had watched a nurse carry her newborn son out of a delivery room through a service exit, and had screamed at everyone who would listen that her baby was alive, that part of her understood completely. Bring him home, she said. Ji-tae nodded once. He walked out. The parking structure on 134th Street was 9 minutes from the hospital by car. Do-yun had argued for coming along for approximately 45 seconds before Ji-tae cut him off and told him his job was Imani and gave him no room to dispute it. Ji-tae took one man, a former military contractor named Cha Sung-won, who had been with the organization for 4 years and who communicated primarily through action rather than words, which was exactly what Ji-tae needed right now. Sung-won drove. Ji-tae sat in the passenger seat and watched the city move past the window. The rain was fully gone now, leaving everything washed and gray and reflecting the flat, early morning light in puddles along the gutters. The streets had the particular emptiness of a Tuesday morning before 7:30, delivery trucks and dog walkers and early commuters, nobody looking at anyone else. The city doing what the city always did, which was to move without acknowledgement of anything happening to anyone within it. Ji-tae called Reyes. She picked up on the first ring, which told him she'd been expecting him to call. You're moving, she said. Not a question, status, he said. Mr. Kwan, I need you to status, he said again. A pause. Then, because she was a practical woman who understood that negotiating him back to the hospital was not a productive use of the next 6 minutes, my team is in position on all 4 sides of the building. We're waiting for the go order. Intel from inside suggests Baek has 6 men in the building, possibly 7 if Min-guk is cooperating with him rather than being held. Min-guk won't cooperate, Ji-tae said. He has nothing left to offer Baek. He came to warn him, which Baek will interpret as Min-guk trying to buy his way back in. Baek doesn't reward failure. He'll be separated from the rest of the group. A brief silence. That's useful, Ray said, and he could hear the genuine assessment. In her voice, she was incorporating it in real time. The infant's location within the building, we have reason to believe basement level, the former dialysis treatment area. Climate controlled, generator powered, separate from the primary access points. How long before you go in? 4 minutes, maybe less. Another pause. Mr. Kwan, if you come within 2 blocks of that building, you will be detained by my people and you will not see the inside of it until this is over. That is not a threat. It is a logistical fact. You cannot help your son from a federal holding vehicle. Ji-tae said nothing. Let me do my job, Reye said. Her voice was steady and direct and carried no particular warmth, but also no performance. Just the voice of someone who meant what they said. I will call you the moment the infant is secured. I promise you that. He ended the call. Sung-won glanced at him from the driver's seat. 132nd Street, Ji-tae said. Pull over. Sung-won pulled over. Ji-tae sat in the parked car 2 blocks from the building and put his phone on his knee and waited, which was the hardest thing he had done in 15 years. At 7:44 a.m., he heard it. Not gunshot, something more contained than that, though it was that too, briefly, muffled by the distance and the building's walls. What he heard first was the movement multiple vehicles, coordinated, the particular organized urgency of a federal tactical entry that was different from ordinary traffic in a way, that was hard to define and unmistakable once you knew it. He got out of the car. Sung-won was out a half-second behind him. Stay, Ji-tae said. Sung-won stayed, which was something Ji-tae noted and appreciated in the same automatic way. He noted and appreciated everything without pausing, without warmth, just catalogued and filed. He walked toward the building, not running. Running attracted attention. He moved with the deliberate, purposeful pace of a man who belonged wherever he was going, which was a technique he had practiced so long it had become instinct. He got within half a block before an agent in a tactical vest stepped out from behind a parked delivery truck and put a hand up. Sir, stop right there. Ji-tae stopped. Step back to the sidewalk. My son is in that building, Ji-tae said. The agent young, mid-30s. The contained expression of someone who had been briefed about this exact scenario didn't move. I understand that, sir. You need to step back. Ji-tae looked past him at the building entrance. The main doors were open. A tactical team had already gone through. He could see the light inside. Movement. Someone being walked out with their hands behind their back. A large man. Not Baek, the build was wrong. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. Reyes. He answered it without stepping back. We're in, Reyes said. Her voice had the clipped quality of someone moving fast and talking faster. Basement is secure. Baek's men are down, no fatalities, 3 in custody. Baek himself is. We're still working on that. But I need you to hear me right now, mister. Kwan, my son, Ji-tae said. We found the infant, she said. He is alive. He is with the neonatal nurse. She did not resist. She is cooperating. She's been monitoring him through the night. He is a brief pause, and in that pause, Ji-tae's entire body went rigid. He's stable, he's small, and he's been through a rough night, but his vitals are holding, and EMS is on site. GTT stood on the sidewalk, 2 blocks from the building, where his son had been held for the past 8 hours. He stood there, and something moved through him that had no name he could reach for, quickly, not relief exactly. Because relief requires the threat to be fully resolved, and the threat was not fully resolved. And his son was still inside a building, surrounded by federal agents, and not yet in his arms. But something adjacent to relief. Something that was the specific physical sensation of a held breath releasing after hours of compression. The agent in front of him had his hand still up, but was watching him now with a different quality of attention. Where is Beck? Ji-tae said into the phone. Mr. Kwan. Where is he? A pause. We don't have him yet. He is still inside the building. Her voice was careful now, precise. There's a situation developing on the third floor. He is a hostage. Min-guk, Ji-tae said, a silence that confirmed it. Ji-tae looked at the building. Third floor. The windows up there were dark. He couldn't see anything from where he was standing. He thought about Min-guk. 15 years. Every version of the man. The one who had stitched his arm in the back of a car. The one who had talked him down from a decision that would have ended everything. The one who had stood in a hospital hallway carrying coffee at hour 5 of a dangerous labor and said she's strong in a voice that carried genuine feeling beneath the performance. And the one who had stolen his son. Ji-tae was not capable of uncomplicated feeling about Co Min-guk, and he understood that about himself, and it didn't change what he did next. Tell your team to stand down on the third floor, he said. Excuse me? Baek won't respond to your people. He doesn't know them, he doesn't have a relationship with them, and right now he's a man who has watched his entire operation fall apart in less than an hour. Ji-tae was already moving toward the building entrance. The agent in front of him moved to block him. He knows me. He has been planning against me for 14 months. Let me go up. That is not a request I can grant. Then don't grant it, Ji-tae said. He looked at the agent, blocking him. Are you going to physically stop me from walking into a building to talk to the man who kidnapped my son? The agent looked at him, looked past him at Sungwon, who had ignored the instruction to stay and was now standing 6 feet behind Ji-tae. Looked at his radio. Ji-tae walked past him. The agent grabbed his arm. Ji-tae stopped. He did not pull away. He turned his head and looked at the hand on his arm, with the particular expression that a man who has spent 15 years in rooms where the wrong expression gets you killed uses, when he needs someone to make a decision quickly. The agent released his arm. Ji-tae walked into the building. The interior was the organized aftermath of a fast tactical entry agents moving with controlled purpose. 2 men in zip cuffs being walked toward the loading area. Evidence markers going down. The chemical smell of a space that had been used for something it wasn't built for. Ji-tae moved through it without looking at any of it. He found the stairwell and went up. 3rd floor. He could hear it before he reached the door, Baek's voice. Loud enough to carry, but not loud enough to be fully understood through the stairwell door, and beneath it the particular silence of a tactical team that has stopped moving. Ji-tae pushed through the stairwell door. The 3rd floor was a wide-open space former patient consultation rooms, with the dividing walls partially removed, industrial shelving along one wall, bare concrete floor. The windows on the north side showed the river, silver and flat in the morning light. Baek Sung-hwan was in the center of the room. He was a big man. The photographs hadn't been wrong about that broad through the chest and shoulders, the heavy build of someone who had spent decades moving through the world by physical presence as much as anything else. He was 57 years old, and he looked at the kind of 50s that accumulates from hard decisions rather than ordinary time. He had one arm around Min-guk's neck from behind, and something in his other hand that caught the light. Min-guk's face was dark red. He was standing, but barely. His hands were at his sides, not fighting it, which meant either the pressure was too much, or he had made a calculation about not escalating. 4 federal agents were spread in an arc at the far end of the room, weapons out, none of them in a position to take a shot without the risk of hitting Min-guk. Baek saw Ji-tae come through the stairwell door. Something changed in Baek's face. Not surprise he was past surprise. Something more like the grim recognition of a man who had expected this and was unhappy to have his expectations confirmed. Kwan Ji-tae, Baek said. His Korean was soul-inflected but rough, worn down at the edges. You're faster than I gave you credit for. Ji-tae walked into the room. He walked to approximately the midpoint and stopped. His hands were visible and empty, not because he'd been told to do that, but because he wanted Baek to have every opportunity to look at him and see someone who had chosen to walk in without a weapon, which was the clearest possible signal that this conversation was the thing he was offering. Let him go, Ji-tae said. He came to warn me, Baek said. He thought that bought him something. It doesn't, Ji-tae said. Min-guk made his choices. Those are his to carry. He looked at Bake directly. But he's not useful to you like this. You know that. He's useful enough, Bake said. Nobody shoots while I'm holding him. Nobody was going to shoot you anyway, Ji-tae said. He took one step closer. Bake, it's over. The building is surrounded. Your men are in custody. Whatever you do in the next 5 minutes doesn't change any of that. The only thing it changes is what it looks like when it's finished. Easy for you to say. Bake's arm tightened slightly. Min-guk made a sound. You walked in here with nothing to lose. Your son is downstairs. Yes, Ji-tae said, he is. Something moved through Baek's expression. It wasn't regret men, like Bake didn't regret, they calculated, and the calculation running across his face right now was the one that happened when a plan fails and a man has to decide who he is without the plan. 14 months, Ji-tae said. You spent 14 months building this. Putting Min-guk inside my organization, running the transfers, setting up the medical contacts, sourcing the clinic. That's real work. He paused. I'm not going to pretend I don't respect the architecture of it. Bake's eyes narrowed slightly. But you miscalculated one thing, Ji-tae said. The same thing Min-guk miscalculated. What's that? You both looked at my family and saw weakness. Ji-tae's voice was level. Completely level. A man with a pregnant wife, a man distracted by something he cares about, that looked exploitable. And maybe it would have been for a different kind of man. He held Bake's eyes. But caring about something is not the same as being undone by it. My wife is the only person who knew something was wrong before I did. She found your money trail. She read Min-guk before I could see it. She stayed clear-headed in a delivery room while someone increased her medication and told her the child she heard cries was dead. He paused. You underestimated her, even more than you underestimated me. Bake's jaw worked. Min-guk, still held at the throat, had his eyes on Ji-tae. There was something in them complicated, exhausted, and underneath both of those things, something that might have been the last functional fragment of the loyalty he had spent 15 years performing, but that, Ji-tae now believed, had been, in some small, original corner, actually real. She figured you out, Min-guk said. His voice came out rough from the pressure at his throat. Months before the delivery, she was the one. He looked at Bake. I told you she was sharp. You said it didn't matter. Shut up, Bake said. It didn't matter because you planned to have the baby gone before she could do anything with what she knew, Min-guk continued, and there was something almost conversational about his tone given the circumstances, the exhausted, beyond caring quality of a man who has already lost and is simply narrating the shape of the loss. But she told him, and he believed her. Min-guk, Ji-tae said quietly. I believed he would have believed me too, Min-guk said. If I had told him about you, years ago, when I first made contact with your people, I think he would have heard me out. The room was very quiet. But I wanted what you were offering more than I wanted, to be honest with him, Min-guk said. So Ji-tae looked at Min-guk for a moment. Then he looked back at Bake. It's finished, Ji-tae said. Let him go and come out of this standing up. Bake stared at him. His breathing had changed, still controlled, but the control was costing him something now. His arm around Min-guk's neck relaxed, incrementally, not enough to release, just enough to indicate that the calculation had shifted. The organization, Bake said. What's left of mine? What's left of it is already in FBI records, Ji-tae said. That's not a conversation you have with me. Bake let out a short sound. Not a laugh. Something harder. You're going to be right behind me, Bake said. Everything they take from my people, the transactions, the terminal connections, the shipping routes, it all traces back through your operation. Some of it, Ji-tae said. Enough of it, maybe. Ji-tae didn't look away. That's a problem I'll deal with tomorrow. Right now I'm standing in this room asking you to put down whatever you're holding and let that man go. That's all I'm doing. Bake looked at him for a long moment. The 4 agents at the far end of the room hadn't moved. The windows behind Bake showed the river. Somewhere below them, Ji-tae's son was with an EMS team, being monitored, breathing, small and furious and alive in the way premature newborns are alive, with enormous effort and enormous stubbornness, as though the universe had suggested they might not make it and they had decided to disagree. Bake released Min-guk. He let go of Min-guk's neck and stepped back and dropped the thing in his hand, a tactical knife. It clattered on the concrete and raised both hands, and the four agents moved forward immediately with the coordinated efficiency of people who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Min-guk bent forward, hands on his knees, coughing. Ji-tae watched Baek get taken down fast, professional, no unnecessary force. Baek went to his knees without fighting it. He was a man who understood when a thing was finished. He looked up at Ji-tae as the cuffs went on. "Your wife," Baek said. His voice was rough. "I had people watching her for 6 months. She never once looked like she was scared of you." Ji-tae said nothing. "Most women in her position." "She's not most women," Ji-tae said. Baek looked at him for another moment. Then he looked away, and the agents lifted him to his feet, and that was the last time Ji-tae looked at Baek's Songwon directly. Min-guk was straightening up, one hand still at his throat, his eyes red from the pressure and something else. Ji-tae walked over to him. He stood in front of him. Min-guk met his eyes and held them with the particular courage of a man who has nothing left to protect and has therefore stopped flinching. "Ji-tae," Min-guk said. "Don't," Ji-tae said. Min-guk closed his mouth. Ji-tae looked at him, the face he had known for 15 years, the face he had trusted with things you only trust to someone you believe is genuinely on your side. The face that had been performing one thing while doing another for over a year, possibly longer. "You know what the worst part is," Ji-tae said. "Not the organization. Not the money. Not even last night." Min-guk waited. "The worst part," Ji-tae said, "is that I would have given you more. If you had come to me and said you wanted a larger stake, more authority, partnership instead of employment, I would have considered it. Because I thought we had built something together that meant something to both of us." He paused. "You didn't have to do any of this." Min-guk's jaw moved. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." "You can't know that," Min-guk said, and the first genuine crack appeared in his voice, not performance, not calculation, just the sound of a man who needed the alternative history to be false, because if it was true, then everything he had done was not just wrong, but pointless. "You were never going to share it. You were never going to look at me as an equal. You were always going to be the boss, and I was always going to be the man who ran things for the boss. And I watched you spend 15 years making yourself into something enormous, and I built half of it, and I was still going to die as the man who ran things for the boss." Ji-tae looked at him. "Maybe," Ji-tae said, "or maybe you never asked." The agents were moving toward Min-guk now. Ji-tae stepped back and let them come. Min-guk didn't resist. He let them take his hands, and he stood straight, and he didn't look at the floor, which was the last thing Ji-tae would remember about him. The way he kept his head up even then, which was either dignity or stubbornness or both, and which was the most purely Min-guk thing he had ever seen. They took him out through the stairwell door. Ji-tae stood alone in the center of the empty third-floor room. Outside the north windows, the river caught the morning light and threw it back at the sky in flat, cold pieces. Celts. The city below was fully awake. Now he could feel it, more in the vibration of 8 million people moving through their ordinary morning, with no knowledge of and no investment in what had happened in this building. Agent Reyes came through the stairwell door. She was smaller than her voice had suggested, compact, dark-haired, somewhere in her mid-40s, with the particular economy of movement that comes from spending years in situations where unnecessary motion costs something. She assessed the room, assessed Ji-tae, and walked toward him with the direct bearing of a woman who had very little time and had decided not to waste any of it. "Your son is downstairs," she said. "EMS has him. He's been stable throughout. They're recommending immediate transport back to Astor Crown for evaluation, but the nurse who was monitoring him says his vitals have been consistent since approximately 2 a.m. Ji-tae absorbed that. "She kept him alive," he said. "Yes. Whatever else she is, she knows her job." Reyes stopped a few feet from him and looked at him directly. "Mr. Kwan, I need a few minutes of your time before EMS moves. There are things we need to discuss about what comes next." "My son comes next," Ji-tae said. "Yes," she said. After that, Ji-tae looked at her. She looked back at him with the level, patient directness of a woman who had spent her career in rooms with men who tried to use force as a substitute for thinking. and who had long since stopped being impressed by that particular habit. After that, he said. She nodded. GT turned toward the stairwell. He walked down 3 floors with his hand on the railing, and the sound of his own footsteps very loud in the enclosed concrete space. And when he pushed through the ground floor door and came out into the loading dock area where the EMS teams had set up their equipment, he stopped. The incubator was there. Portable, compact, built for transport, the same one he had seen in the photograph on his phone 8 hours ago. It was hooked to a portable power unit. The neonatal nurse, a heavy-set Korean woman in her 60s, who had the weathered calm of someone who had spent decades in high-stakes medical situations, was standing beside it with one of the EMS technicians, talking in low, quick, clinical language about numbers. Ji-tae didn't fully understand. But he didn't need to understand the numbers, because through the clear panel of the incubator, he could see his son. 31 weeks, smaller than Ji-tae, had been able to fully conceptualize from a photograph. The pale, fine-featured face of someone who had arrived in the world before the world was ready for him. Sensors on his chest, a tube delivering oxygen, his arms at his sides, hands slightly curled in the instinctive way of very new newborns, his fingers the size of things. Ji-tae had no adequate comparison for, because he had never stood close to something this small and this irreducibly important. He walked to the incubator. The nurse looked at him. "You're the father," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Ji-tae said. She studied him for a moment with the assessing eye of someone who had watched parents at bedsides for 40 years and had developed an accurate read of what she was actually looking at. "He's been fighting all night," she said. "Premature doesn't mean fragile. It means early." This one, she glanced at the incubator, and Ji-tae saw a flash of something genuine in her expression before she controlled it. "This one is not ready to give up." Ji-tae crouched down in front of the incubator. Through the panel at eye level, he could see his son's face clearly. The dark hair, fine and damp against his head. The furrow between his brows that Imani would later say he had inherited directly from Ji-tae, and which Ji-tae would deny, and which both of them would know was entirely true. One tiny hand. Ji-tae reached through the access port on the side of the incubator. The nurse didn't stop him, just watched and placed the tip of one finger against his son's palm. The infant's hand twitched. Then, in the slow, deliberate, tremendously effortful way of someone performing an enormous act of will, the fingers curled. Closed around Ji-tae's fingertip. The grip was almost nothing. A thread of pressure, barely registrable, the kind of force that wouldn't have moved a piece of paper. Ji-tae felt it go through him like a current. He stayed perfectly still, crouched on the concrete floor of a loading dock with the morning light coming in sideways through the open service door, and he did not look away from his son's face, and he did not move his hand. And the thing that had been building in him since the moment, the delivery room doctor had said the words that were not true-crested, and broke somewhere in his chest in a way that was neither loud nor dramatic, but was, for the first time in 15 years, completely unmanaged and completely genuine. He stayed there, crouched, his son's fingers around his, for a long time. Nobody spoke. The EMS technician looked at the nurse. The nurse gave the smallest possible headshake. They waited. And Ji-tae, who had spent 15 years mastering the art of showing nothing, let himself feel the full weight of what had almost been taken from him, and what had not, and what that meant about every decision that was still ahead of him. His son held on, and Ji-tae held on back. Agent Reyes found Ji-tae still crouched by the incubator when she came down from the 3rd floor. She stood at a respectful distance, for a moment reading the room the way she read every room efficiently, without sentiment, with a clear-eyed acknowledgement of what was in front of her. Then she walked over and crouched down beside him, which surprised him, because it was an unnecessarily human gesture from a woman who had been operating in the register of professional efficiency since the moment he had first heard her voice. "The EMS team needs to move him soon," she said quietly. "Every hour outside a proper NICU is a risk they don't want to accumulate." Ji-tae nodded. He didn't move his hand from the access port yet. His son's fingers were still loosely curled, around his fingertip not gripping anymore with that first electric intensity. just resting there, the hand of someone who had decided the immediate crisis was resolved and had relaxed accordingly. Tell me about what comes next, Ji-tae said. Reyes sat back on her heels. She looked at the incubator for a moment, then at Ji-tae. Baek is in federal custody. This morning's operation is connected to an existing indictment we've been building for 18 months: narcotics trafficking through the port system, money laundering through his Flushing real estate holdings, and now kidnapping across state lines, which adds federal charges that make the rest of it look minor. She paused. He's not getting out. Not at his age. Not with what we have. Min-guk, Ji-tae said. In custody. He'll be charged with kidnapping, conspiracy, fraud. The financial crimes alone will take prosecutors a year to fully document. She looked at him carefully. He'll cooperate. Men in his position almost always do, once the alternative becomes real to them. He'll give you everything he knows about my organization. He'll give us everything he knows, Reyes said carefully, without specifying the target. What we do with it depends on what it is and what it connects to. Ji-tae finally withdrew his hand from the incubator. He stood up slowly, his knees registering the complaint of a man in his early 40s who had been crouched on concrete after a night without sleep. He looked at Reyes directly. I want to have a conversation with you, he said. Not now. Not here. After my son is back at Astor Crown and my wife has held him and I know they're both stable. He paused. A real conversation. About what I know, what I can document, and what a genuine cooperation agreement might look like. Reyes studied him. She had the particular quality of stillness that good investigators develop the ability to receive information without immediately reacting to it, to let it settle before deciding what it meant. That's a significant offer, she said. I know what it is, Ji-tae said. It would require your organization's full exposure. Not selective disclosure, everything. I understand that. And it would have consequences for people beyond you. Associates, employees, I understand that too. He looked at her steadily. I'm not making this offer because it's easy. I'm making it because I spent last night crouched on a concrete floor in a loading dock, hoping my son would grip my finger, and I've decided I'd rather face the consequences of what I've built than spend the next 20 years making sure he never finds out what it was. Reyes was quiet for a moment. Call my office at noon, she said. We'll schedule something formal with counsel present. Ji-tae nodded once. The EMS team moved in then, professional and efficient, and Ji-tae stepped back and watched them prepare his son for transport with the careful urgency of people who understood exactly how small the margins were and worked within them, without drama. The transport back to Astor Crown took 11 minutes. Ji-tae rode in the ambulance with his son. He sat alongside the side wall, while the technician monitored the incubator readings and called ahead to the NICU team, and he watched the city pass through the small rear windows of the vehicle, the streets. Fully morning now, full of people who had no idea the ordinary unstoppable machinery of a city that absorbed everything and continued regardless. He called Do-yun from the ambulance. He's secure, Ji-tae said. We're 2 minutes out. Tell Imani. A pause on the line. Do-yun's voice when he came back was not his professional voice. Before beat. It was the voice of a man who had been sitting in a hospital room with a woman who had been holding herself together through sheer force of will for the past several hours, and who had just been given the first piece of information that made holding together feel worth the effort. She's asking if he's okay, Do-yun said. Tell her he's fighting, Ji-tae said. Tell her he has her stubbornness. A brief pause. Then she says he gets that from you. Ji-tae looked at the incubator. Tell her I'll be there in 2 minutes, he said. The NICU team at Astor Crown was ready when the ambulance pulled in. Dr. Park was there. She had not left the hospital, which Ji-tae noted without surprise. She had the look of a woman who had spent several hours doing the specific work of untangling her own culpability from the situation and had arrived at an honest assessment of where she stood. She met Ji-tae's eyes as he stepped out of the ambulance, and she didn't offer reassurance or apology. She just moved directly to the incubator and started doing her job. That Ji-tae respected. The NICU was on the 4th floor, a controlled, quiet space of concentrated care that operated in an atmosphere lower light than the rest of the hospital, carefully modulated temperature, the sounds of equipment doing the work that bodies not yet ready to do it entirely on their own needed done for them. The team transferred his son from the transport incubator to a proper NICU unit with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this hundreds of times, calling numbers and readings back and forth, adjusting, monitoring, recalibrating. Ji-tae stood outside the glass partition and watched. He had been awake for over 30 hours. He was aware of this the way you become aware of a physical injury after the adrenaline has metabolized not overwhelmingly, but persistently, a dull insistent pressure behind his eyes and in his lower back and across the tops of his shoulders. He ignored it. Dr. Park came out to him after 20 minutes. "He's doing better than I expected," she said. Her voice was direct, clinical, but not cold. "For 31 weeks after the night he had, his vitals are remarkably stable. His lungs are the primary concern that's standard at this gestational age. He'll need the NICU for at minimum 4 to 6 weeks, possibly longer." But she paused, and for a moment the clinical composure shifted very slightly. "He's strong. He's genuinely strong." Ji-tae looked through the glass at his son. "Can I take him to his mother?" he said. Park looked at him. "Not yet. She needs to come here. We'll set up access so she can see him. Hold him if he's stable enough within the next few hours. But he stays in this unit." "Then take me to her," Ji-tae said. Imani was sitting up in the hospital bed when the door opened. She had been sitting up for the past 20 minutes, ever since Do-yoon had told her, because lying down felt like the wrong posture for what she was waiting for. She had sent the nurse out. She had asked Do-yoon to wait in the corridor. She had sat in the bed with her hands folded in her lap, and the monitors making their steady sounds, and the morning light coming through the window in the particular washed, clear quality that follows a long rainstorm, and she had waited. Ji-tae came through the door alone. She looked at his face. She knew from looking at his face before he said a word. She knew the way she had known things about this man, from early in their marriage, not by any supernatural mechanism, but by the simple accumulation of watching him closely for 3 years, learning the particular vocabulary of his expressions, which was not a large vocabulary and not an easy one to learn, but which, once you knew it, was entirely legible. She had never seen his face look like this before. Not relief, she had thought she would see relief. What she saw was something older and quieter than relief, something that had come out the other side of relief and kept going. The specific expression of a person who had stood at the edge of an irreversible loss and had been pulled back from it, and now was standing in the ordinary world again, which looked different from this side of that edge than it had ever looked before. "He's in the NICU," Ji-tae said. "4th floor, doctor. Park says he's strong." Imani's hands tightened in her lap. She said strong, Ji-tae said again. That was the word she used. Imani pressed her lips together. Her eyes were dry. She had made it about crying somewhere during the long hours of waiting. That had to do with not spending resources she needed for other things. But the area around her eyes tightened, and she breathed once through her nose, slowly, and then she looked at Ji-tae, standing in the doorway of her hospital room, and held out one hand toward him. He crossed the room. He sat on the edge of the bed beside her, and she put both arms around him, which was not a thing they did easily or often, because neither of them was constitutionally built for uncomplicated physical comfort. But she put her arms around him, and he put his around her, and they sat like that on the edge of the hospital bed in the morning light and said nothing for a long time. She could feel how tired he was. It was in the heaviness of his arms, and the way he leaned into it slightly, which was something he never did when he was operating at full capacity. He was running on nothing, which meant what he had done last night, and this morning had run entirely on something below the level of strategy and calculation, on some deeper mechanism that didn't require sleep or food or the normal resources of a functioning body. "Min-guk," she said finally, "in custody, Bake." "Same." She pulled back slightly and looked at his face. "Are you hurt?" "No, Ji-tae. I'm not hurt," he said. "I walked into a building and had a conversation. That's all." She looked at him for a moment longer, reading the face she had learned. "Reyes," she said, "I called her. We have a meeting at noon." Imani was quiet. "I'm going to give her everything," he said. The quiet continued. She looked at her hands, then back at him. What does everything mean for the people who work for you? She asked. Some of them will face consequences they've spent years knowing were possible, he said. I'm not going to pretend that doesn't matter, but I can't build what comes next on the foundation of what I've been running. It doesn't work that way. You can't keep one part and let go of the other. He paused. You asked me last night who I was going to be after this. I remember. I don't have a clean answer, he said. I don't think I ever will. What I did and what I ran, that doesn't disappear because I've decided to stop. The consequences are real, and they'll be real for a long time. He looked at her directly. But I know what I'm choosing, and I know why. Imani looked at him. The legitimate shipping companies, she said. They're genuinely profitable. Yes. Then we start there. He nodded. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He didn't move. Outside the window, a bird moved across the washed blue morning sky and disappeared. I want to see him, she said. I know. Park says a few more hours until he's stable enough. I don't mean hold him. She stopped. I just want to see him. With my own eyes. Not a phone call, not someone else's description. Ji-tae stood up. He looked at her with the expression of a man calculating whether what he was about to attempt was feasible. Can you walk? He said. I walked to the bathroom an hour ago. That's not the same as Ji-tae, she said. Get me a wheelchair and take me to the 4th floor. He looked at her for another moment, then he went to get the wheelchair. The NICU corridor was quieter than the rest of the hospital, in the way that spaces housing very new and very fragile things tend to be quiet, not the absence of sound, but the presence of careful sound, everything modulated, nothing abrupt. Ji-tae pushed the wheelchair. Imani sat straight in it, her hands in her lap, her eyes forward. Dr. Park met them outside the NICU glass and didn't argue about the visit, which confirmed Ji-tae's assessment of her as a practical woman. She simply positioned them at the observation window and pointed to the unit in the 2nd row. Imani looked through the glass. She looked for a long time without saying anything. Ji-tae watched her face while she looked. He watched the thing that moved through it, not a single thing, but a sequence, rapid and layered, like weather, passing across a landscape and fast forward. Shock at the smallness of him. Then something fierce and specific that he recognized as the expression she had worn when she had grabbed his sleeve in the delivery room. The expression of a woman who had decided something was true before anyone else was ready to confirm it and had held on to that decision through everything that came after. And then something that settled in, slower and deeper, a recognition, a confirmation, the specific quality of a person seeing something they believed in, finally made visible in the physical world. Her hand came up and pressed flat against the glass. Just rested there, open-palmed, not dramatic. The gesture of someone making contact with the nearest available surface between herself and the thing she was looking at. Ji-tae put his hand over hers. Ji-tae. They stood like that at the glass, Imani in the wheelchair with her palm against it, Ji-tae standing behind her with his hand over hers, and neither of them said anything, because there was nothing that needed saying. Because some moments are complete without language, and require language only to be made smaller. Inside the NICU, Kwon Eli Jun lay in his unit with the focused, consuming effort of someone with a great deal of growing still to do, his chest moving in its small, steady rhythm, his hands at his sides, his face carrying the brand-new, pre-formed expression of a person who has not yet learned to manage what shows on their face and is therefore showing everything. At noon, Ji-tae met with Agent Reyes in a conference room on the hospital's administrative floor. His attorney arrived 12 minutes late, which Ji-tae had not planned, but which Reyes accepted without comment. The three of them sat at a table that was too large for the conversation and not large enough for everything the conversation was going to contain. Ji-tae had slept for 2 hours. He had eaten a sandwich that Do-yoon had obtained from somewhere and placed wordlessly in his hand. He had showered in the hospital's physician lounge, which required a conversation with an administrator that Do-yoon had handled. He looked like a man who had been through something significant and had processed exactly as much of it as was necessary to function and had filed the rest for later. He laid it out for Reyes, clearly and without performance. The shipping routes, the port contacts, The accounts, all of them, including the ones that had been used to move money for operations, he would prefer not to describe in detail, but would describe in full, because he had said everything, and he meant everything. The names of the people in his organization who were central to the criminal operations versus those who were exclusively in the legitimate side of the business. The distinction between the two, which was real and documented, and which his attorney had spent the previous hour reviewing for accuracy. He also gave her Chung, the accountant Min Guk had intimidated into silence 4 months ago. Chung's location, the nature of the pressure that had been applied to him, and the evidence that Cha-hung had actually uncovered that connected Min Guk's transfers to Baek's network. He gave her the documentation package that Min Guk had assembled as leverage, the same package that had been offered to Ji-tae in the kidnapping demand. Du Yun had recovered it from Min Guk's secured cloud storage using credentials Min Guk had provided during the early morning interrogation session, operating under the misapprehension that providing the access would somehow improve his position. It would, Ji-tae had decided, but not in the way Min Guk had imagined. It would improve his position in that a federal prosecutor with comprehensive documentation of Baek's operation had less need to build a supplementary case out of Min Guk's knowledge of Ji-tae's organization, which meant Min Guk's cooperation value decreased, which meant the deal Min Guk would eventually be offered would be built primarily on the kidnapping and fraud charges rather than on the criminal intelligence he possessed. Ji-tae did not explain this calculation to Reyes. He didn't need to. She was not a woman who required things explained that she could work out herself. The meeting lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. When it was over, Reyes closed her folder and looked at him across the table. "This is going to take time to process and verify," she said. "During that time, your organization's operations will be under scrutiny. Some of your people will be interviewed. Some will be charged. I understand that, and you," she held his eyes. "The cooperation agreement covers your prospective conduct and provides substantial mitigation for past conduct. It does not provide immunity. You should understand that clearly." "I understand it," he said. She studied him for a moment. The look of someone trying to accurately assess the thing in front of them. "Why now?" she said. "Not 2 years ago, not a year ago. Why this morning?" Ji-tae was quiet for a moment. "2 years ago I didn't have a son," he said simply. Reyes looked at him. Then she nodded once, picked up her folder, and stood. "I'll be in touch," she said. She left. Ji-tae sat at the conference table for a moment with his attorney, who was a careful, methodical man named Park Sung-jin, who had represented him for 9 years, and who understood the nature of the representation without requiring it to be described. Park Sung-jin gathered his documents and looked at Ji-tae over the tops of his reading glasses with the expression of a man who had a number of professional observations to make and was selecting the most essential one. "This will cost you a great deal," Park said. "I know," Ji-tae said. "The legitimate operations, properly managed, can sustain the family," Park said carefully. "But the restructuring will take years, and the legal exposure, even with the agreement, is my—" "Sung-jin," Ji-tae said. Park stopped. "I know what it costs," Ji-tae said. "Draw up whatever needs to be drawn up. Start with the terminal transfer documentation. I want those 3 terminals formally removed from the criminal network's access structure by end of week. Legitimize whatever can be legitimized. Dissolve whatever can't be." He stood up. "And find Chung. Make sure he understands he's not in danger anymore." Park nodded. He put his glasses away and began organizing his papers with the precise movements of a man who had made peace long ago with operating in complicated ethical territory, and who had just received the clearest instructions he had ever been given. The hospital days that followed moved in a rhythm that was unlike anything Ji-tae had experienced in 15 years of structured operational living. The NICU dictated the schedule, visiting hours, feeding schedules, the incremental measurements of Eli's progress, that doctor. Park delivered each morning in language that was precise and honest, and that Ji-tae had learned, by the 3rd day, to interpret accurately. Grams of weight gained, oxygen saturation levels, the slow, deliberate closing of the gap between the body Eli currently had and the body that would eventually be ready to go home. Imani was discharged on the 4th day. She moved into the hotel across the street from the hospital rather than going back to their home, because the hotel was 3 minutes from the Nika, and home was 45. And no version of her was going to be 45 minutes from her son while he was in that unit. Ji-tae did not argue this. He moved into the hotel with her. They settled into it, the two of them, in a hotel room that was comfortable but impersonal, living out of bags, ordering room service at irregular hours, because the NICU visiting schedule fractured the ordinary mealtime architecture of a day, sitting across from each other in the evenings, with the particular intimacy of two people who have been through something catastrophic together and are still in the immediate aftermath of it and have not yet fully processed what that means. They talked more during those hotel weeks than they had talked in the previous 6 months combined. Not always about the big things. Sometimes about small things, what to order, whether the chair by the window was more comfortable than the one by the desk, what music Imani wanted playing in the room, whether Ji-tae had slept. But sometimes about the big things. They talked about them without the protective layer of indirection they had both been using for most of their marriage. Imani talked about Baltimore, about her mother working double shifts and what it meant to watching someone sustain something out of pure refusal to give up on it, and how that had shaped the part of her that had held on to the certainty that Eli was alive, through an entire night of being told she was wrong. Ji-tae talked about Min Guk. He talked about it once on the 6th night in the hotel room at 11 p.m., with the city sounds coming through the window and Imani sitting across from him, with her legs pulled up on the chair and her tea going cold. He talked about it for almost an hour, not the betrayal, which they had already covered, but the relationship itself. What it had actually been. What parts he believed had been genuine, and what parts he now understood had been constructed. The difficulty of not being able to cleanly separate them. Imani listened without interrupting. The parts that were real, she said when he stopped. I think they were real. I think he genuinely cared about you in the beginning. Maybe for a long time. She paused. I think he cared about you and also wanted what you had, and he made a decision about which one mattered more. People do that. It doesn't retroactively make the caring false. It just means he chose wrong. Ji-tae looked at her. That's a generous interpretation, he said. It's an accurate one, she said. There's a difference. He sat with that. It doesn't change what he did, she said. He made choices. He has to carry those. But you don't have to make the carrying of it easier for yourself by citing the whole 15 years was hollow. She looked at him directly. That would be a lie. And you're trying to stop living inside lies. Ji-tae was quiet for a long moment. When did you get this clear-eyed about other people's psychology, he said. I've always been this clear-eyed, she said. You're just listening now. He looked at her. That's fair, he said. She almost smiled. I know. The legal proceedings moved at the grinding institutional pace of federal cases built on substantial evidence. Baek Song-hwan was formally indicted on 11 counts, including conspiracy to commit kidnapping, trafficking, and to collection of financial crimes that the prosecutors described in their press release with the specific enthusiasm of people who have spent 18 months assembling something and are finally allowed to show it to the world. He did not cooperate. He engaged his attorneys and said nothing, and accepted the posture of a man who had decided the fight was worth having even when the outcome was not in meaningful doubt. Min Guk cooperated fully and completely, which surprised no one who understood his situation. He gave the federal prosecutors everything he had, every communication with Baek, every transaction record, every detail of the operation's planning and execution. He named the corrupt medical staff. He identified the nurse by name, the doctor who had replaced Park in the delivery room, the administrator who had disabled the security cameras. He drew out the architecture of the entire operation in the kind of meticulous detail that only someone who had helped build it could provide. His sentencing hearing was scheduled for 8 months after his arrest. Ji-tae did not attend. He had no legal requirement to do so, and his attorney had advised against it, and Imani had said nothing when he told her he wasn't going. She had just nodded in the way that meant she understood something she was not going to push on. What Ji-tae did instead, on the morning of Min Guk's sentencing, was take Eli, who was 6 months old by then and had come home from the NICU after 7 weeks and had been consolidating the considerable energy he had brought into the world into increasingly vocal opinions about his environment, and sit with him in the kitchen of their home outside Manhattan while the morning light came through the windows. He sat there with Eli against his chest, and Eli's hand wrapped around his finger, still the same grip, still that specific, unreasonable intensity, and he thought about Minguk. He thought about the sentencing that was happening across the city at that moment in a courtroom where a man who had spent 15 years making himself indispensable was being given the formal accounting of his choices. He thought about what Imani had said in the hotel room. He decided she was right. He decided it the way he made most important decisions, not with fanfare, not with drama, but quietly in a moment no one else would see, in the way of a man arriving at a conclusion after a long and honest look at the available evidence. The parts that had been real were real. The parts that had not were not. Both things were true. Both things were something he was going to carry, and carrying them, honestly, was the only version of carrying them that was worth the effort. Ji-tae looked down at Eli. Eli looked back at him with the focused, slightly skeptical expression that Dr. Park had told them was entirely normal for infants of his age, and that both of his parents privately suspected was specific to him. "You're going to be impossible," Ji-tae told him. Eli blinked. "Your mother is going to encourage it," Ji-tae continued. "She thinks it's good for people to have their assumptions challenged." "She's right, which makes it worse." Eli made a sound. "I know," Ji-tae said. Imani came into the kitchen. She was in her robe, coffee already in hand, her hair loose, her feet bare on the kitchen floor. She stopped in the doorway and looked at the two of them with an expression Ji-tae had never seen on her face before the past 6 months, or maybe he had seen it and had not known how to read it, which was possible given how much reading he had been learning to do. "What are you telling him?" she said. "That he's going to be impossible," Ji-tae said. "Smart kid will figure out what gets results," she said. She came over and looked down at Eli, and Eli redirected his focused skepticism to her, and her face did the thing it did when she looked at him, the thing that had no name Ji-tae had found yet. The expression of a person whose understanding of what mattered had been permanently rearranged. She reached out and touched the top of Eli's head. His hand, still wrapped around Ji-tae's finger, twitched. "The sentencing is this morning," she said. Not a question. "Yes," Ji-tae said. She looked at him. "How are you doing with that?" "Working through it," he said honestly. She nodded. She sat down across from him at the kitchen table with her coffee. They sat in the morning light with Eli between them and the ordinary sounds of the house around them, and the entirely non-ordinary weight of everything that had brought them to this kitchen on this morning, and neither of them tried to make any of it simpler than it was. The restructuring of the Kwan business interests took 14 months. It was not clean. It was not a story with a clear line from corrupt to legitimate, from dark to light, because real transitions of that kind never are. There were people in the organization who had worked within criminal societies for legal consequences that Ji-tae could not shield them from, and did not try to. There were business relationships that had to be severed, revenue streams that had to be cut, assets that seized or surrendered. There were months where the financial picture was genuinely uncomfortable, in ways that Ji-tae had not experienced since the very early days of building something from nothing. His legitimate shipping companies, Kwan Maritime Solutions, and 2 subsidiary logistics operations were profitable, well-run, and staffed primarily by people who had no knowledge of and no involvement in the other side of the business. He focused on those. He hired a new CFO, a Korean-American woman named Hannah Cho, who came from a major logistics firm, and who took the job after a very direct conversation in which Ji-tae told her exactly what the company was coming out of and what it was trying to become. A sound like green at him across the conference table and said, "And let's build something that doesn't need to be explained," which was the most useful thing anyone had said to him about the project. He also hired Imani. This was her idea, or rather it became her idea after the several months of watching the restructuring from the outside and having opinions about it, that she had begun articulating with increasing specificity at the kitchen table in the evenings. She had a management background, financial literacy, and the particular quality of having seen the organization from the outside for years in a way that gave her a perspective on its legitimate operations that nobody currently inside them had. She came on as operations director for the domestic side, which was a formal title for a role that in practice involved her being in 3 conversations simultaneously while keeping Eli's schedule in the other half of her attention and occasionally telling Ji-tae that he was approaching a problem from the wrong direction, which was almost always right. It was not a simple life. It was not the life either of them had imagined when they had stood in the kitchen 3 years ago, with a positive pregnancy test, and Ji-tae had said, "Then we figure it out." But it was a life built on what was actually true, rather than on the managed presentation of something more convenient than the truth. That turned out to matter more than Ji-tae had expected. Eli June came home on a Thursday in May, 7 weeks after his birth. The coming home was not the dramatic moment Ji-tae had imagined during the long NICU weeks. There were no particular thunderbolts, no cinematic clarity. It was logistically complicated. Imani had prepared the nursery with an intensity that Ji-tae had wisely not commented on. The NICU nurse gave them an exit briefing that lasted 45 minutes and covered more contingencies than Ji-tae had briefed his security team on before some fairly significant operations. Dr. Park shook both their hands at the hospital entrance and told them to call with anything, and meant it. They put Eli in the car seat. Ji-tae drove, which was not something he normally did himself, and he drove at a speed that would have made any of his usual drivers nervous, which was approximately 12 miles per hour, below the posted limit on every stretch of road between the hospital and home. Imani sat in the back beside Eli and did not comment on the driving speed. When they got home, Ji-tae carried the car seat inside and set it on the kitchen floor, and the 3 of them existed in the kitchen together for a moment. Ji-tae standing, Imani crouching beside the seat, Eli regarding the new environment with his default expression of focused assessment. Then Imani picked him up, and Ji-tae sat down at the kitchen table, and Eli made a sound that was not quite a complaint and not quite approval, but something in between. And it was so ordinary, so specifically and unremarkably ordinary, that Ji-tae had to look out the kitchen window for a moment to manage whatever was happening in his face. The yard outside the window was green and new with spring. Ordinary yard, ordinary light. He looked back at Imani and his son. There was a Sunday afternoon, 3 months later, when the 3 of them were outside. It was warm but not hot late August, the particular quality of afternoon light that this time of year carried, golden and slightly heavy, the kind of light that makes ordinary things look considered. Imani was sitting in the chair she had moved outside for the season, Eli in her arms, his face turned toward the light with the startled pleasure of an infant who has not yet lost the novelty of the sun. Ji-tae was sitting beside her, not doing anything in particular, which was something he was still learning how to do and was getting incrementally better at. He was watching Eli. He was thinking about the delivery room. He did that sometimes, not compulsively, not with the quality of something unresolved, just in the way of a person who has a specific memory that carries significant weight and returns to it sometimes, the way you return to a place you once stood when something important happened. The covered bundle, the nurse moving toward the service exit, his wife's hand on his sleeve. "Our baby isn't dead." 4 words from a woman who was heavily medicated and exhausted, and had been told by every professional in the room that she was wrong, and who had held on to the truth of what she knew with a grip that matched exactly the grip her son had closed around Ji-tae's finger in a loading dock at 7 in the morning, in the aftermath of the worst night of both their lives. He reached over and put his hand on Imani's knee. She looked at him. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. She looked at him for a moment longer, the look that read him, that had always read him, that he had spent years being more legible to than he had been to anyone else in his life. "Okay," she said. She went back to watching Eli. Eli's hand, which had been resting against Imani's arm, moved in the small, purposeful way of someone who has located a finger and intends to grip it. He found Ji-tae's instead. Ji-tae had moved his hand from Imani's knee to the arm of her chair, and Eli, with the impeccable instinct of someone who knew exactly whose attention he wanted, closed his fingers around Ji-tae's and held on. Ji-tae looked down at the hand around his finger. The afternoon light moved across the yard. He thought about Min-guk, somewhere in a federal facility, carrying the weight of a fiend-year calculation that had cost everyone around it something irreplaceable. He thought about Baek Song-hwan, who had looked at a family and seen a vulnerability, and had been wrong about what families were made of. He thought about the man he had been for 15 years, and the man he was in the process of becoming, which was not a simpler man or a cleaner one, but was, at least, an honest one. He did not let go of Eli's hand. Eli did not let go of his. Imani looked at the two of them, her husband and her son, in the late afternoon light, connected by that small and specific grip, and she looked for a long time before she looked away. And what was on her face while she looked was not happiness, exactly, because happiness was too simple a word for the thing that sits on the other side of genuine loss and genuine survival. It was something harder one than happiness, and therefore more durable. It was what you built when you had decided what mattered and had paid the actual price of keeping it. Ji-tae sat in the afternoon light and held his son's hand and breathed. And for the first time in 15 years, that was enough.